The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. That's what Steve Jobs believed, and it's never been more true in healthcare. Today, I'm joined by Craig Wortmann, clinical professor of innovation and entrepreneurship at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. He is the CEO of Sales Engine and also the author of What's Your Story? Using Stories to Ignite Performance. Craig is an award-winning educator, a three-time entrepreneur, and one of the most respected voices in leadership storytelling. One of my favorite episodes. Everyone, this is your executive masterclass in storytelling. Hello, everyone. This is Eric Glazer, and welcome to Bright Spots in Healthcare, produced by Bright Spots Ventures. We bring leaders together to not only inform you, but also unearth bright spots, successes at health plans, hospitals, and other incredible organizations around our land. And our goal is to identify as many of these bright spots as possible so that you can determine if the ideas shared during this very episode can be applied at your organization. We believe that this approach of finding a bright spot and cloning it is the most effective way to improving healthcare in our lifetime. Now, today, we're spotlighting one of the most powerful leadership tools, in my opinion, that rarely gets the attention it deserves, and that is storytelling. Whether you're pitching a new product, motivating your team, pitching a new policy, or trying to transform a consumer experience, it's your story, not your deck, that's ultimately going to move people. So joining me today is someone that I have had the privilege of working with personally, Craig Wortmann. He is a professor at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management and the founder and CEO of Sales Engine. Craig is one of the best storytelling coaches out there. I feel I'm kind of qualified to say that. I had the privilege of collaborating with Craig on a 2-hour storytelling keynote workshop that he led, and I sat in the audience and admired for Teladoc Health's 2024 Sales Summit. And the impact he made, I know, has lasting effect on the Teladoc team, certainly lasting effect on me. And so Craig's here to help us all understand how you, as a leader at your healthcare organization, can collect, construct, and convey powerful stories and inspire change and drive results. This is going to be a really fun conversation. Super excited we're doing this. Craig, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Eric, for having me. I've been looking forward to this. We're going to have a great talk.
We are. It's like a mini masterclass. So I want to start with like why storytelling wins in healthcare. And I know everyone's thinking, oh, I get it. I know, or I wouldn't have clicked on play. But like we love data, right? In healthcare. But data doesn't influence it. A story does that. So let's talk real quickly, psychologically, why that is. And then how leaders should take that and form an insight combining data and story.
Sure, it's a great place to start, and I'm gonna start, Eric, with a hard question for all of us as leaders. And the question is, it's a weirdly hard question. The question is, how much of your day or week do you spend persuading people to do something? And the reason I start with that strange question is because a lot of people have not consciously thought of that. Like, what percentage of my day, how many? So I have 9 meetings today. I have 12 meetings tomorrow, whatever. How many of those, and in what sense am I using the art of persuasion to try to change people's minds, get them to do something? I mean, it was right in your intro of this conversation. You know, you're trying to sell a new policy. You're trying to change a care experience. You know, those things are, I would argue, are forms of persuasion. So then the next question becomes, okay, what tools am I bringing to that party? What tools am I going to use as a human being to persuade another human being to do something they may or may not want to do? And so the reason I start with those couple of strange questions is I think that frames the argument, at least to start, to suggest, well, you've got a whole bunch of options. And what people often do, what leaders often do, and we study this at Kellogg, we study this in our Sales Engine company, when we are operating on what a psychologist would call a default behavior, we often bring facts and data, thinking that that is going to persuade someone to do something. And look, this is not a fight between data and stories. It is a combination of the elements. But what's interesting, and I find super fascinating, and wrote a book about this a long time ago. I'm still learning about it. And that is, we're not often conscious we're not even conscious of the need to tell a story around that data. And then even when we're conscious that, like, I really should be telling a story, we're not disciplined enough to go through the hard work and the process of collecting the right story. So that second meeting tomorrow where you really have to persuade someone to do something, you wrap a story around that data, the story is well told, it lands with power and impact, and you begin to either change someone's mind or persuade them or motivate and inspire them to do something. That's a lot, but it's the question here is, it's not data versus story. It's how do you show up in various situations in your life and in your day equipped with the right story at the right time for the right reasons.
Okay. Can I'm going to put you on the spot here. So let's use a really basic scenario. I believe, let's pretend we're playing pickleball and I want to convince you that we need to spend some money to play indoors today versus playing outdoors. And I'm going to say to you, hey, it's 39 degrees and it's a little windy. It's uncomfortably cold outside. Let's spend some money to play indoors. How do we take the 39 degrees as a data point and allow me to be more compelling and convincing you to play indoors? Or is that too simple of a scenario?
It's not simple at all. I mean, it's great. It's great that it's a simple construct. Here's the thing. And, I don't have a pickleball story in my quiver of arrows, but here's what I would do with that. If I were you trying to convince me to play indoors on a 39-degree day, what I would not do is say, it's 39 degrees outside. If I'm Eric, I would say, to reverse this, Eric says to Craig, look, man, it's 39 degrees outside. Our hands are going to get cold. There is an increased chance of us catching a cold. We all have a lot of travel. We both have a lot of travel coming up. Let's spend the extra incremental money and go indoors. That is a fact-based, bullet-pointed list of data, facts, that you're using to persuade me to go indoors, right? Simple as that. Rather, how might you say, Craig, a few weeks ago. Now, you got to have this story. This is the key, right? So 3 weeks ago, a friend of mine and I were playing, and just like you, he and I are traveling like constantly. We're constantly on and off planes. And we were playing pickleball. We decided to play outside. It was about the same temperature it is now. And God, the poor guy, Bob or Susan or whoever, came down with a cold because it was cold outside and we just weren't properly prepared. We figured, the sweat and the exertion would pay off for us and keep us warm. Well, it turns out he or she got sick, had to miss a couple of days, a couple of flights, just completely messed her schedule, went sideways. Let's do this. Instead of risking that, let's go inside. What the research would suggest, Eric, is, now, again, I made that story up, right?
Sure.
You can't do that. We're not in Hollywood. If we're in Hollywood, you can do whatever you want. But you and I are not in Hollywood healthcare, right? So you have to have that story, which is really hard work. You've got to anticipate that I want to play inside and you want to play outside, or vice versa, whatever. And you've got to anticipate that. You got to go collect the story. The story's got to be 100% true, and you got to be able to tell it. It's got to be in your mouth. It's got to be ready to go.
Right. So that's a cultural change. It's a mindset change, right? So we have to. Right. So what do we have to do, all of us as leaders, to shift in that mindset from facts only to story? How do we do that? Because we just sort of did that on the fly there, but now we got to kind of plan for it and try to create a cultural shift in mindset around from facts to story.
You do what you do as a leader every other minute of your day, which is you prepare. You get ready. You anticipate your high stakes meetings. You do what every normal, good solid leader in the world does. And that is, you look forward, you look down the street, you look down the road and you say, okay, what are my high stakes and medium stakes meetings? If it's low stakes, like if it's 55 degrees or it's 70 and inside. It's a low stakes decision. You don't need to arrive with a story. You say, Craig, let's play outside. I argue with you. We play whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not high stakes. Nobody's going to get hurt because the temperature is relatively the same. But if it's medium stakes or high stakes, you do what every other leader on planet Earth does that is worth their weight. And that is you prepare. You look out, you say, okay, over the next month, what are the meetings that I've got scheduled where I have got to crush it? I've got to persuade. I've got to walk out and leave a vibration in the room when I'm gone that they're like, wow, that person, wow, okay, that I'm inspired. Or, you know what? That guy, Eric, he really changed my mind. I'm starting to think a little bit differently. That was super helpful. You anticipate that, then you have to go do the hard work. And that's the first sort of C of my process. And that is collect, or you could call it curate. You've got to curate the stories that you're going to need. What do we normally do? And here's where I'm just pounding the table. I will keep pounding until you tell me to stop. What we do instead is we go, oh, yep, I got all these meetings coming up. All right, pull up PowerPoint. Let's get some decks ready. Right? It's exactly the wrong move.
And we're never been in a time. I mean, even when I go back in time when you and I first met, I mean, today, fast forward to 2025 when we're having this conversation versus January 2024 when you were doing your last keynote with me. It's just so much easier, right, to create stories, right? You put the ingredients in, you throw it into an app on your phone or on your computer, and boom, you got a first draft where it's so much easier to have quivers. So let's talk about, you alluded to it, your framework. You talk about a 4-part framework, right? Collect, categorize, construct, and convey. I think I have that right. So if you break that down for us, how might someone like a chief medical officer at a health plan or someone leading care transformation, how might they think about that? Collect, categorize, construct, convey, as far as a framework for storytelling.
Yeah. So the way I would think about it as a chief medical officer is you're going through your day and your days and your weeks. And if you are aware, the first thing is awareness. So be aware of the stories that you need to tell. So you and I, Eric, have covered that already. So be aware of the stories you need to tell. Then you begin the first C. You begin the process of collection. You could change that word to curation. Doesn't matter. Same word. But you want, think about how you curate art, or you curate wine, or you curate, matchbooks, or whatever you collect in your life. You curate the collection. You want it to be bespoke to you. So you're a chief medical officer. You're walking around. You're going through. You're reading articles. You're having interactions with patients. You're having interactions with clinicians. You're having interactions with hospital administrators, all the things, right? And what you're looking for, what you're listening for, what you're aware of are the stories that are washing through those interactions. This is where the hard work really begins, because in order to collect something, you've got to make it real, right? So you've got to take it. I have a hallway conversation with Dr. Glazer. I'm walking down the hall, right? And he tells a story of an incredible story about a patient. I gotta take a left in that hallway, go into my office and write down that story. And I literally mean that. So write down the bones of that story, just bullet points, right? Get it down on paper so you've got it. You can own that story. So that's the first part. So collect those stories. And then quickly, you want me to dash through the rest of them, just for argument's sake?
Sure, absolutely. I guess I want to make a quick comment on that, because I found that to be the hardest thing to implement. And we ended up having weekly meetings coming out of that summit you led, trying to get things down. I mean, I want to get into the categorize, construct, and convey, because we did get a lot in the same category when we went through that exercise. So I had to push the team to be thinking broader. But go forward with the 3 other C's real quick.
Yeah. So the next one, as you point out, is categorize. And so what I mean by categorize is, and this is just prep work. You say to yourself, okay, where are the situations that I'm going to be in over the next month where I'm going to need stories? And that is categorization. What you're doing 2 things in categorization. You're saying, where am I going to be in situations? So I'm going to be in front of a patient group. So I need stories about patients. I'm going to be in front of the leadership team of this medical system and inspiring them to implement a new policy. So I'm going to need some stories that support that, et cetera, et cetera. This is again, hard work to figure out the categories of stories that you need. So that's one type of category. Now, think of a matrix. So it's a spreadsheet. So rows and columns. You've got the rows that are categories. I got meetings for patients. I've got meetings for clinicians. I've got meetings with the hospital administrators. I got meetings with the community. Those are all rows on your spreadsheet. Now, the columns are the types of stories you're telling. So the categorization is two things. It's the situations you're in where you need stories. And then the columns are success stories, failure stories, fun stories, and legends. There's 4 types of stories that leaders should be telling: success, failure, fun, and legends. Why? Why 4 types? Because all 4 types, each type does a different job for you. It's a different form of persuasion because it's doing it differently. A failure story, obviously, is much different than a success story. It does a different job for you in that group of patients or with that group of administrators. So that's the categorization.
I have a follow-up on that on the failure story. Success and failure stories, I do think, are fairly self-explanatory. In the interest of time, could you just break down for folks what fun and legend stories mean?
Sure. A fun story is you do this naturally all the time. I just want, my book and my work at Sales Engine at Kellogg is pushing people to do this with more discipline. You do this all the time. You tell your fun stories to your family. What job to be done is a fun story? Well, let's say you're chief medical officer and everybody's had an incredibly stressful week and it's Friday morning and people are just burnt. Well, how might you, not inappropriately, but how might you at the staff meeting on Friday at noon tell a story that just lightens the mood, lowers the intensity? It's not a joke. It's just a story. It's a story about something goofy that happened that week, just to give everybody a little relaxation. It's so interesting, Eric. I've been doing this for so long now. My book came out a long time ago and it's still going, that crazy thing. And I talk about this every week with somebody. You've seen me do it at Teledoc. Fun stories are a superpower. Don't, just because the word fun is in it, don't discount the power of the story. People are like, oh my God, thank you for letting us relax for 2 minutes and just have a laugh. Now we can get back to work. So that's a fun story. A legend story is something completely different. A legend story is, why did this hospital start? Why? What is their mission? And if I may, Eric, I witnessed this last week. I was doing some work with an incredible organization that I can't name, but was doing a storytelling workshop. And there was a woman who was a speaker before me. She's the president and CEO of Craig Hospital out of Denver, out of Englewood, Colorado. And she told the origin story.
Did you just say Craig Hospital?
Craig Hospital, my same name. Yeah,
named after you, right?
Yeah, right. I wish. So the Craig Hospital, wonderful place. I didn't know much about it until she told the origin story. She had 180 of us in the palm of her hand. That's a legend. It's the legend of Craig Hospital. It's why it exists. I say to my Kellogg students, you all have legends. Why are you at Kellogg? That's a legend of you. No, you don't have to, don't put too much freight on the word legend. You don't have to be Steve Jobs or Martha Stewart to be a legend. Of course, they are legends. Martin Luther King is a legend, right? He's a legend in our lives and history. But you are as well. Why are you here? Why do you do this important work? That's an origin story, otherwise known as a legend. So those are those two categories. And you're right. Success and failure are pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, I've actually just did about a year ago, we did a clip on our origin story, which is tied to Jerry Sterner and the Power of Positive Deviance. Won't get into it now, but I was also working with a provider that will go nameless, and one of my biggest sort of pet peeves is when you're trying to persuade someone. Most people are persuading them on features, benefits, data, and I like saying, by and large, the audience you're talking to, especially if it's let's say in a sales environment, that audience doesn't give a rat's ass about your solution. What they care about is their problems, their job, how they're going to be looked at, whether this solution is going to help them look great, all those things. And so one of the things that in this example, this organization talked a lot about is their duration. Like, they've been around for 20 plus years, and through a lot of data around how many engagements they've had and how many patients they've served. And it was like this massive numbers that no one really cared about. So I convinced the executive team, who's going to be presenting this part of the presentation, to say, hey, we've been around for 20 plus years. And one of the reasons that matters to you is that we've made the most mistakes, and we've fixed those mistakes. And then we've made more mistakes, and we fixed them again. And because of that long history of continuously tripping and then fixing those potholes, we've become stronger and stronger. And why that matters to you is like there's no one else that has that kind of strength and experience that's going to lead you to the promised land. And so that landed. And so that's more of a failure story. And I want to ask you, like, why is it so important? So we took that, like, it wasn't even an origin story. It was like an opening brag, and we turned it into almost a failure story. Why are failure stories so important, and how do we tell them in a way that builds trust and not fear?
Well, you partially answered your own question. I mean, why failure stories are probably the most powerful type of stories. We don't actually know this for sure, but I would argue they're your most powerful of the 4 types is because they do build trust. So you answered the question right in your question. Why, when you tell a failure story, I trust you more. And it's counterintuitive, right? Because it's like, wait, aren't you wrecking your credibility by telling a failure story? No, you're doing exactly the opposite. You're saying, you know what? I am humble enough to know that I'm always going to fail. I am brave enough, I'm bold enough to voice that failure to you and to own it. And what that means by definition is I'm coachable. Another word for coachability is trust. You can trust me to do the right thing. You can trust me to tell you the truth. I just told you a failure story. Like, and when we get into where we get into trouble, doctors, salespeople, Kellogg professors, business owners, where we get into trouble is we pound our chests and tell nothing but success stories. And look, success stories are great. You should tell them. But they must be balanced with failure stories and the other types. It gives you maximum persuasion. Like, this person is successful. Wow, he or she has done this. That's amazing. But they're also humble and coachable, and I feel like I trust them. And you ask the question, why? It's because they told a failure story or 3.
100%. When I'm talking to solution providers across our industry, it's the hardest thing to convince them to do. Like, everyone's super scared of doing that. And I think it's just the way of just being different from everyone else. Like, hey, you could trust me. I'm not just full of it. And we're, by the way, just to give you a piece of, we're doing great on time here. So I want to shift, in my mind, like why is storytelling, why does it win in healthcare? We covered that. We just covered your framework: collect, categorize, construct, convey. And
we should hit construct and convey.
That's right. I almost left. I forgot about that. Let me also we got success, failure, fun, and legends as the 4 categories. And now let's get into construct and convey before we leave off.
So now you've done the hard work of collection. You've thought about, where would I tell this story? Now another piece of hard work has to happen, which is construct. You got to build the story. You've got to design the story. And I always pause here, Eric, because sometimes when I use the word, the phrase design a story, people think I'm changing the truth. You're not changing the truth. You're just designing the story for impact. You're collecting all the details of the story, which, by the way, are facts. You're collecting the facts of the story, and then you're laying them out. You're leaving some facts out, putting some facts in. That does not change the truth. It's just, does it matter that he was wearing or she was wearing a red or blue shirt? No, it's a fact. That's true. It's useless. It's called, when we teach entrepreneurship, we call it truly useless, TBU, right? So it doesn't matter. So you're leaving some of that crap out. You're putting only the facts that matter in, and then you're weaving it into an emotional construct we call a story. A story has to have, and get ready for more C's here, Eric. Sorry.
The 5 C's, right?
There's a lot of words that start with C. So, the story, the construction of a story depends on another five C's this time: character, context, conflict, climax, and closure. Eric and Craig go to play pickleball. We just have our 2 characters and we have context. We have both of those 2 C's already. So now something has to happen. They're driving over, something happens. That's climax. That's conflict, rather. Then something happens, the aha moment. They decide to go indoors or outdoors. That's climax. And closure is, here's what happened as a result of the story. So that's the construction of a story. And then finally, convey is just, I wanted another word that started with C. It's telling stories. You got to be a powerful storyteller. And that's a performance art. There's pausing. There's eye contact, all the things we teach that are, outside the scope of this conversation probably, but telling a powerful story is a performance art. It's a performative act.
Love that. I was telling you before we kind of pressed record, I had the privilege of sitting in on a session with Michael Lewis, your world famous author.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Moneyball, Blind Spot, and all the other of his great books that became movies, Hollywood movies. And one of the first things he said is, all great stories start with a compelling character, or characters in your case, because you and I were starting that pickleball story. And in healthcare, sort of same thing. Like you could start with a patient, you could start with an innovator, you could start with a clinician, but all great stories start with a character. And the second thing he said, or maybe not the second thing, but he went on to say later on, was the character always teaches you something. It could be bad. It could be something that they did bad. It could be like a villain. It could be something good. So that totally is consistent with your 5 C's. And so let's get into now that you have your 5 C's in place, let's get into that fourth. Well, let's back out of the 5 C's and let's get back to, the fourth C from the first. Yeah.
Conveying a story. Yeah. So, well, Michael Lewis is right. I mean, if you think about his books, I mean, the very first book I read was assigned in business school was Liar's Poker about Solomon Brothers. It's a book about Solomon Brothers. I still remember some of those stories. So, again, this is pointing to, and now here's a data point for you, Eric, and for your audience. The research over the last about 6.5 decades indicates that stories are 6 to 7 times as powerful as facts. So that would be like you and me telling your audience, you and I telling your audience, if you wear a purple shirt, you're 7 times as persuasive in every meeting. Would you wear a purple shirt? You probably would, right? That's what Michael Lewis, that's what I can't put words in his mouth, but when he says start with the character, that's why you hook someone right off the bat. My book, which is right behind me here, the cover of my book is an upside down question mark for a reason, right? Stories are hooks. They're hooks. They draw you in. Now, the way you draw people in is by conveying a story. So, telling this great storytelling. We can break that down across 2 dimensions. If you think of a left to right or west to east, you think of a train going from station A to station B. That is what we call the business arc of the story. The story's got to do a job for you. The job to be done is the business arc. Why is Eric telling me this story? Why is Michael Lewis telling me this story? Why is Craig telling me this story? That's the job to be done. That's what we call the business arc. The more interesting arc is, so the story's got to do the job. The train's got to get you from A to B. I want you to think about the patient experience this way. So that I'm going to tell you a story that is constructed, designed, all 100% true, but it's designed to have you end at B going, wow, that's their patient experience? That's interesting. So it's doing that job for you. The more interesting arc, I think, is the north to south arc. That is the emotional arc. You pull the story like this. You take people on a journey. So now it's not a train just going left to right. It's the experience of the train ride. What are you seeing out the windows? What are you feeling as you look at things out the window? That's the thing that's the hard work that we leaders have to do to convey or tell powerful stories. What is the content of the emotion? Not only do people often not go even past PowerPoint slides to think of stories.
Hey, Craig.
Even when they think of stories, they're not designed for an emotional impact.
Let's rewind. You froze up there. I don't know. And
sorry.
Cesar, we're going to rewind that back and just restart them up. So you had just said
the emotional arc, business arc and the emotional arc. You want to do that again?
You were doing the emotional arc. So Cesar, you're going to have to pay attention here because this isn't a clean break. I'm going to need you to make sure that this fits. You were talking about the arc. You said the word convey, and then you probably froze up for about 3 to 4 seconds.
Ah, shit. Okay. Well, let me just rewind that, Eric, and go back to your question about convey.
Okay. Should we start? Okay. So Cesar, make sure we don't get repetitive here, and you could just 86 everything that Craig's about to repeat on top of it. And if you have any questions, contact me. We'll do a silent count for Wortmann here. 3.
So, Eric, if you think about conveying a story, telling a story, that breaks across 2 dimensions. So one is the business arc of the story. Think of a train leaving station A and going to station B. The story's got to take you somewhere. In entrepreneurship, we have this phrase called the job to be done. What is the job to be done in the story? I need people to think differently about the patient experience. at this medical system. So I'm going to tell a story that takes the train's going to leave station A. They think this. They're going to think this when I'm done, or I'm going to hope they think this when I'm done. They're going to walk out and go, wow, that's the patient experience. That's really interesting. So the story is doing a job for you. Now that's the west to east axis, or left to right, whatever. Then the more interesting arc, that's the business arc. Then we turn it and we say the north-south axis is the emotional arc. What is the emotional journey that this story is taking me on? What do I feel as a consequence of you telling me the story? What are the feelings or the feeling or the different feelings that I have as you tell me the story? That is incredible. When you get those two things right, the story is constructed to get you from station A to station B, and you feel powerful feelings as a result of experiencing that story. That is raw persuasion. So that's the convey. That's the architecture of the convey part.
Okay, so let me repeat that back. For conveying, we've got sort of this XY kind of axis chart where we have a business arc. We'll call it, going and use the train analogy or metaphor, station A to station B.
Yep.
And then you have the emotional north-south Y-axis where we go from probably happy or sad or angry and angry and happy, whatever those emotions are.
Yes.
Is that where does the conflict fall on the AB axis or on the X-axis, or the Y-axis, or where it intersects?
It intersects, Eric, because when you put a character in motion and then you put that character in conflict, the third C, character, context, conflict. And conflict doesn't have to be bad just because it's the word conflict. It can be funny, it can be anything. But you put that character in conflict, now there's tension. There's tension. And that tension will often beget emotion. And that's where you've got people hooked. You've got people hooked with the story. Once you get in character, into context, and into conflict, your people are, uh-oh. They go, what's going to happen? You're telling a story about patient experience, and the patient is interacting with the clinicians, and there's something not being said in that room, in that patient's room, and it's hanging in the air, and you can feel it. And as I tell you that story, the story listener, the people hearing the story are going, uh-oh, there's something wrong. It's just like watching a movie or reading a novel, Eric. It's the same emotional impact. The learner, the reader, the receiver of the story is going, something is wrong here. There's something being unsaid. And you know that the story is going to resolve that tension for you, but you're going to sit in the tension for a little while. This is what stories do that nothing else in the world does very well, which is why we all go to movies and read books. Somehow, when we put on business clothes or uniforms at a hospital, we lose that. And the best people don't.
Okay. I'm going to unpack. I'm going to unpack all this for everyone in case you're taking notes. If you want to look at the transcript, this is going to be I'm going to simplify everything. So what Craig just said is we have 4 categories that you need to be thinking about as you are thinking about your entire storytelling framework. You get to collect. I provided the example that we start weekly meetings to share. We have the categories, right? You have 4 kinds of stories, folks, under Categorize: success, failure, fun, and legends.
Yep.
You got to construct, I'll come back there, and then you got to convey, which we just covered. Convey is that, X-axis, Y-axis analogy or metaphor that I just created to Craig's beautiful kind of picture he put in our mind's eye. So those 4 are the big 4 C's. And then coming back, collect, categorize, coming back to construct, you have 5 C's under construct, where you go for character, context, conflict, climax, and closure. And that's where we're at so far. Okay. Now, you teach these 5 categories of, you teach these 5 C's of the story structure. Where do we as healthcare leaders most often stumble? Character, context, conflict, climax, and closure. Where do we stumble, and what's the impact of those elements missing, and maybe help us figure out how to avoid that?
Yeah. I can't look you in the eye, Eric, and say that any one of the 5 C's of constructing a story is missing. I will tell you where I see most people make a mistake. I can't tell you that it's a particular problem in healthcare, but most people, when you start pressing them on storytelling, they leave out the character. They just say, here's the situation, this hospital system did this, and then here's what happened. And they have the rough outlines of a story, but because there's no character, there's no story. Because hospital system X is a building, not a person. I can't feel a building.
Well, I was going to ask you, could if constructed, if designed correctly, couldn't a health system be a character, or does it have to actually be a human being?
It has to be a human being. It has to be a human being.
It has to be human.
And this is where you can play with you can say, Joe instead of Eric to protect the innocent. You can change the name. That's fine, right? You can even say, Eric at a major health system. You don't have to name the health system. If you have to protect the innocent, that's fine, right? But it could be Eric. You have a character.
And it could be a team of people, right? So if we're really trying to emulate how a health system did a complete turnaround in hard financial times, we could talk about how the executive team dealt with their journey and the decisions they made.
Yes, and I'm just pressing you here because I've been a lot of years trying to learn how to tell stories. Mm-hmm. You can say executive team, but that's a nameless, faceless group of people. You got to say led by Dr. Susan, whatever. Even if you change her name, that's okay. You have to have a name because names we are social creatures and we connect with other social creatures. I can't connect with an executive team. I can't connect with a building.
Understood. Okay.
What you've done is taken the north-south axis, the emotional arc. You've taken the y-axis out of the equation. That's where the power is.
Love it. That's great guidance. Great guidance. All right. So we're doing fine on time, but I do want to get into the execution because I remember distinctively you spent a lot of time when I was with you back in January warning the organization that, you're going to leave and there's going to be some energy for a moment and then the execution is going to fall short because storytelling doesn't fit into our regular workflow. It doesn't always, instinctively, you don't think of it when you're dealing with the tyranny of the urgent. So let's talk about story as a leadership discipline.
Yep.
So I think you said it's not just an art, it's a habit. So how do we create this discipline and what do leaders do at their organizations to inspire and keep storytelling as a muscle and keep it stronger and make it stronger over time?
Storytelling, like most things in life and in leadership, is a discipline. It's not a knowledge. We all know that we should be telling stories. That's not surprising. It is a discipline. And in order to turn a discipline into a habit over time, think of, Eric, just think of staying in shape or working out, right? Every day or every other day, whatever your routine is, you get up and you have the discipline of getting out of bed and hitting the gym. It's a discipline. If you do that for months and months and months, it can turn into a habit. Sometimes it can turn into a lifelong habit. We actually don't know from the research on habits how quite long that is, but it's months, not weeks. And so you've got to have that discipline. So now bringing this closer to home, if a chief medical officer is listening to this or folks in the healthcare business or anyone, what I coach people to do is once a week, not a day, because we get crazy, we all do, once a week, collect one story. Collect one story once a week. And that story can be from an article you read, a podcast you listened to, a blog, a colleague in an operating suite. It can be anywhere. Harvest, otherwise known as collect, that story, and then begin to categorize it and construct it and practice telling it. If you do that once per week as a discipline, you just have it, you literally put it in your calendar. Friday at 3:00, it says, collect a story. Or Monday morning at 8:00 in the morning, collect a story, and you begin getting the discipline like you do anything else in your life, working out, eating right, running great meetings, whatever it is, you will begin to implement that discipline. And what will happen fairly rapidly, it'll be slow and hard and arduous at the beginning, but what will happen is you will accumulate, obviously, stories over time, and you'll find yourself telling them, and simultaneously, you'll find yourself being more aware of the stories that are around you. You get better and better at this. You really do, because you're more aware, like, that is a great story. I'm going to get that story. I'm going to call that doctor again and just say, hey, can you slow down for a second and just tell me that story again so I can get the contours of that story? Now, that's one answer. I'm going to give you one more quick answer. As a leader in organizations, what you can also do is ask your team to do what I just asked your audience to do for themselves. So first, model the behavior. Leaders need to be models first. They can't say, hey, Eric, hey, everybody, go do this for me. I've got to do it, right? But then I can say in my Friday meetings, my Monday morning huddles, whatever, I just did this with the Northwestern medical system. So in my huddles, hey, be aware of stories. Try to grab one story, grab it down from the ether, write out some bullet points, the bones of the story, write out the 5 C's, and then you've got it. And you can start to process that into a story.
So and just a suggestion, I think you organize it like a book club. We did that with some success. We did Friday mornings, morning coffee on Friday. Friday tends to be a day where everyone is a little bit more upbeat, and you bring your stories, and everyone shares a story. But yeah, you have to incorporate it. I love that. Once a week, collect the story, then categorize it, construct it, convey it, practice it.
Absolutely.
I love that.
It's the only way I know how to do it. And, I've been after this for a long, long time. And so I've accumulated, over 1,000 stories that are now curated in my collection and categorized in literally a spreadsheet. And that's just incredibly helpful to me now that I can say, okay, I need a story over here. I need a story over there. It goes back to the beginning of our conversation. I can be more prepared.
I want you to share one of your favorite stories. I want to, hear your stories in action and let the audience benefit from a little bit of Wortmann. But before we do that, I want to put you, and I know you're a pretty humble guy, so I would love for you to tell everyone, just briefly, where they could tap into some of the storytelling expertise that you have accumulated over all these years of working with all these entrepreneurs, both through Northwestern and through your firm Sales Engine. Where could they find stuff to support their leadership team, their management team, their entire organization, tap into some of this great knowledge? And then also, why don't you plug your book? You've mentioned it a couple of times. We've seen the picture, but we haven't mentioned the title, so people could search it.
So thanks for asking. I mean, three quick ways to do that, from low fidelity to high fidelity. Low fidelity would be, my LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm at Craig Wortmann, WORTMANN, 2 N's. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn and share stories. I've been learning a lot about resilience lately. So over the last couple of years, I've been posting a lot of stories on resilience, which are quite fun, and stories on other things. So you'll get a sense there. So that's super low fidelity. Medium fidelity would be my book, What's Your Story? This book. So my book has been a lifelong journey for me. I'm so lucky that at some point I just sat down and wrote this sucker. I've been having fun with it every week for 20 years now, believe it or not, almost 20 years. So that's another way you can access it. It's on Audible. It's on all the usual places. And then high fidelity would be, I have master courses on this. So what we call master courses, Sales Engine has built a lot of digital on-demand master courses. Those are most easily found at our website called learnsellgrow.com. So that'd be a good place. That's high fidelity if you really want to dig in.
Great stuff. So actually, I'm gonna put you on the spot before you tell me your favorite story. And I don't know if you're going to have a clear recollection of this, but we're going to try, and we could always cut it if it doesn't work out. So you and I are having a cup of coffee. I think we're maybe 12 hours away from you going on stage in front of like 300 or 400 people. And the producer I ask you to incorporate, we were looking at your entire flow for this 2 hours. I can't remember vividly all the segments we agreed upon and everything that you were doing, but sort of a longer form of what everyone's been listening to. And I wanted you towards the end to address the elephant in the room. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And I thought what you did was just brilliant. And so I know a lot of people are listening, and as if they're watching us, we're both sitting down here, so it won't have the same effect. But I do think this is a perfect example of storytelling and the power of story. And so I'm wondering if you could try to recreate that scenario for everyone listening as best as we can, and see if we could bring it to fruition here, Craig. And by the way, we didn't prep for this. I didn't prep Craig for this. I just came up with it because Craig said something just a moment ago that prompted me, and Craig probably knows what he said, and it prompted me to bring this up. So let's create the scenario. You've just been on stage for an hour and 45 minutes. And let now our listening audience, what were we seeing and watching in this auditorium, and what happened next?
Sure, I could try. We were talking at that point, nearing the end of our journey with those 400 or so people, talking about how to put a framework of deliberate practice around storytelling to become really what we call getting good at getting great at storytelling. And we were talking about deliberate practice, and deliberate practice meaning we've got to set goals. We've got to surround ourselves with coaches who will help us reach those goals, and we've got to get continuous feedback. And so I think, Eric, if I'm remembering it correctly, what I said was, as you look at me here on stage, it is clear to you that I lost my right leg. I'm an amputee. And
actually, let me interrupt. Sorry. It was not crystal clear. What we knew was, because Craig's very mobile on stage, he was limping around awkwardly the entire hour and 45 minutes. So most people, once they noticed it, sort of forgot it, because Craig is that eloquent of a presenter and just absolutely brought us all in. And we were more listening to his emotion. But we weren't, not everyone was crystal clear about what was going on with Craig's health. Keep on going there, Craig.
Okay. So I shared with them, as a way of closing, just my own journey through deliberate practice. And I said, you may notice that I walk funny. And I walk funny because a year and a half ago, I lost my right leg to cancer. And as a lifelong runner and a very active guy, it's been a hell of a couple of years. And so I have been learning a lot about resilience, and I've been collecting my stories. And one of the things that I need to do if I'm ever going to run again, which is a lifelong love of mine, is I am going to have to do what I'm asking you to do with storytelling. I'm going to have to implement the system of deliberate practice, set goals, some small, some big, surround myself with coaches, get continuous feedback, embrace the discipline and the pain of literally learning how to walk again and eventually learning how to run. And so that was I think that's probably what you were remembering, Eric, but I'm not sure I'm remembering it with a lot of fidelity.
No, you did great. It was an unbelievable moment. And people just were jaw dropped, and just an incredible testament to who you are, not just as a presenter and as an entrepreneur and a professor, but just who you are as a human being. So it was a moment. I know we probably didn't capture it as powerfully as it was if you were there, but I mean, that's an example of a story on how to bring people into creating a discipline for storytelling or anything else that they need to do within their organization, their business, or personal life, right?
Yeah. I wonder, this is an aside, but I wonder if you could pull that clip into your podcast. That'd be kind of cool.
I think I may get some pushback from the people that...
That's true.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm going to go there. I mean, maybe they would. Could ask, but I tell me, so we still have some time. I know we have a heart out here, but we have a few minutes left. So tell us, what are your favorite stories to tell that you've repeated a lot, that may be like the one story you keep coming back to in your own work, and why does it continue to resonate regardless of who's listening or watching?
Well, so Eric, what I did in preparation for this podcast, just like I'm asking your listeners to do, is I prepared. So I went into what I call my story matrix, which is my quiver of arrows. It's my spreadsheet. And I grabbed a story that I thought would land with this audience. You and the audience will be the judge and the only judge of whether that is true or not. But this is a story about surgeons that I call 1% cutting. 1% cutting. That will come clear in about a minute. This story took place at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation down in Houston. I was asked to go meet with the surgical corps there to help them understand the power of storytelling. And I was in a room with 25 surgeons, including the chief surgeon. So interestingly, it was all men, and we were all in a room together. And I showed a quote on the wall on the screen about this notion that you and I have been discussing, Eric, about how stories are 6 to 7 times as powerful as facts. And we had an interesting moment in that room. We were about an hour into our workshop, and the chief surgeon, who was sitting in the middle of the room, was visibly agitated. And, as a professor, as a facilitator, as a professional speaker, you learn really quick. When you got a small group of people, you can see what's going on. And so I did what I hope a good facilitator would do. I stopped and I said, "Doctor, it seems like you are taking some issues with what I'm sharing." And he said, "Craig, I am." He said, "You need to stop with this story stuff." And given my remit to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, I thought that was an interesting comment. I said, "Tell me more," which is one of the disciplines we teach people when facing heat. And he looked at me and he looked around the room and he said, "Craig, let me put it to you this way. I'm about to cut you open. In that moment," and he said it just like this, Eric. He said, "In that moment, do you want story or do you want facts and my best science?" And I thought about that for a second. And then with a little bit of heat, I might admit, I said, "Doctor, in that precise moment, I want nothing but facts and your best science. But let me put it to you this way. You sew me up and you roll me down to the recovery room. And as my clinician, you come down and sit on my bedside and try to talk me out of the behavior that got me in the OR in the first place. You better bring a different tool." And I got to say, Eric, I give him full credit because there was a challenge in the room and he sort of leaned back. He thought about it. He looked around again at his colleagues and he said, "I think I understand what you're trying to get across here." And I said, "Doctor, I appreciate that very much. What I'm trying to get across is you spend, even as a surgeon, 1% of your time cutting. The other 99% of your time is spent persuading." And Eric, I've told that to engineers. I've told it to, obviously, doctors. I've told it to CFOs because it's also true. We as leaders need stories and facts and technical expertise. We need all the things. But stories are 7 times as powerful as any other thing in that situation.
We call that a success story as far as the category goes.
Yeah, I'd call that a success story.
And
I give him full credit because he was not happy with me. And he really, I don't know if I can look you in the eye and say he changed his mind. What he did was expand his perspective about this thing that I had flown there to teach them, which was storytelling.
Okay, we have a few minutes left real quick. So I think the character in that story isn't the doctor. He's actually the conflict. You're the character in the story.
I was the character. And then there was another character.
Right. And the context is we're in a room with doctors at Robert Wood. The conflict is this physician making a fairly
aggressive move.
and well thought out,
Yep.
It's what it is. Perception is reality, and it's fair. The climax is how you thought about it and then brought him. And then the closure was, okay, I see what Craig's trying to make the point.
Yeah. We came to the middle in a very real way. Like I accept the fact that, my God, when someone needs just the facts, give them the facts. But be conscious of the pie that, the pie of your week is 100%. What percent of that is persuasion? This brings us full circle, my friend, to our conversation.
And I think that going from A to B there, from the conveying standpoint, is self-explanatory. But what I really want you to break down as we finish up here is that north to south emotion. You made a dramatic pause there. You took some humble pie, and tell me a little bit more about how you conveyed that emotion as we get ready to finish up.
Well, I designed that story. I mean, it's 100% true. That you have to trust me on that. I was there. I'm first person. I'm the character. But I designed that story I wanted those pauses for you to go, for your audience right now here to go, uh-oh, right? I want you to feel a little bit of fear, and then I want you to feel a little bit of anger. I was pissed. I was not happy with him. I was like, buddy, you can throw this at me. I'm gonna bring my argument. And I was a little aggressive in returning the tennis ball across the net. And I admit that. So I want you to feel a little bit of anger. Maybe what you feel is you don't like me so much at that point as a facilitator. Maybe the other half of you go, Craig, go get him, right? I can't predict what your audience will feel, but I can design for the fear and the anger. And then I can design at the end, climax and closure, for relief. I can design for relief.
Good stuff. By the way, you had an opportunity to go full circle with the pickleball stuff, and you went with tennis. That's a miss on your end. No, listen.
You're right.
This was just awesome. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know how super busy you are and hard and high in demand you are. I'm telling you, folks, if this wasn't compelling enough, but you've obviously listened to the show because you trust bright spots in healthcare and me personally, check out Craig Wortmann online. Check out Sales Engine online. This is a special organization and a special individual, and he can teach you a lot. So if you are a healthcare leader and you're trying to drive change, digital engagement, member engagement, value-based care, whatever it is, data informs, but stories inspire. And the stories, as Craig reminds all of us, is your most powerful tool to influence. Thanks so much, Craig. And all of you listening, we don't take the time you spend with us for granted. We hope you take the ideas shared today to inspire your thinking, make changes, enhance your entire organization, and make healthcare better for all of us tomorrow. This is your Bright Spots in Healthcare podcast. Take care, everyone.